right. Hello and welcome back to the next big thing. My name is Chris Gennady, Global Head of Research at WisdomTree. As promised, we've upped the cadence. We've gotten more and more guests, and we're putting out more and more episodes. And today I am joined by frequent co-host Mobeen Tahir. Those who have been listening to the podcast have seen and heard Mobeen numerous times. He is back. And we're also joined by Max Heinemeyer, Chief Product Officer at Darktrace. And just as a bit of background, Darktrace is a featured company in numerous WisdomTree strategies: artificial intelligence, cloud computing, cybersecurity. There are not many companies like Darktrace that kind of bridge across all these different mega trends. So it is quite an honor, and we are quite excited, Mobeen and I, to bring some further thoughts on the company to the market today. But before we get started, we do need to state the following. To clarify, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of WisdomTree and Darktrace and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied on as a forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities, and reliance upon them is at the sole discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. And so, with that, Max, you have quite a curious background, and sometimes in the cybersecurity world, it's always interesting to kind of hear how people end up in the cybersecurity world and whether they have had experience maybe on the cybersecurity. You hear about the offensive side, the people who are hacking in, and you hear about the defensive side, people who are defending. And a lot of times when you think of the companies in, say, a cybersecurity strategy, they tend to focus a lot on defending. But to be good at defending, you probably need to know a lot about the offensive side as well. So we would love, Mobeen and I would love to hear more about how your history, your background put you in the place that you are today within Darktrace.
Amazing. Chris, Mobeen, thank you so much for having me today. I was really looking forward to this. I think you're spot on there, right? Having an understanding of the offensive side of security absolutely helps to be a good defender. But I also want to make clear that I don't think you necessarily have to have been an offensive security researcher or actor to be a good defender. There's so much in defensive security about automation, SOC work, blue teaming, policy regulations that you can do with little or just surface level offensive knowledge. So just wanted to get that out of the way. But speaking personally, it absolutely helped me. I come from a background where I've done a lot of video game hacking, video game cheating, all in a fun context as a teenager, just taking things apart, tinkering, right? Building computer systems with friends and just understanding how these things work. And then at some point, I did realize you can do this for money. It's called penetration testing. So when I started doing my proper bachelor's and later my master's, I got very interested in the ethical side of hacking. And I think it's fair to say that I got quite obsessed with it to a certain degree. It's like a rush of power. Anybody who's ever done any hacking understands that it's a very powerful feeling. You can get into the flow, and I jump from topic to topic. It's such a big world to explore, right? It can be web application hacking, it can be network infrastructure hacking, mobile hacking, could be cloud hacking. There's so many different ways to look at this. But I very quickly noticed, and this is in the early 2010s, that once I started my penetration testing career as an ethical hacker with a team that I later led, every time we engaged in an exercise and we got hired to break into a company, although I wouldn't say we were the best hackers in the world, we always went unnoticed. Even when we got out the digital crowbar and rattled all the windows and knocked down the doors, nobody ever noticed. And that's when I realized, well, hacking is interesting and great, but there seems to be a massive problem on the defensive side. And every time we came in and found some problems and vulnerabilities, it turned out that when we re-engaged maybe a year later or 6 months later with the same client, most of these problems still persisted. So I felt like I entered this industry with bright eyes and a bushy tail and thought, this is amazing. Let's get things done and let's move the needle. And it turned out that it felt like treading water and not moving forward. It was good fun. It's an empowering feeling and it's very technical work. But did it really help companies to move ahead? I'd like to think so, of course, but I tried to see the bigger picture. So I started looking around, noticing that penetration testing is fun and good, but doesn't really move the industry forward. People still got hacked. Things didn't change. So I wanted to explore the bigger picture, and that's in around 2013, 2014, 2015, when I looked for innovative new companies and ways to look at the problem. And that's when I started seeing Darktrace emerge with their, what I found, very novel approach to cybersecurity. So I got into the whole industry by curiosity as a young teenage ethical hacker, and then stumbled into my first professional job doing this for a living, and then noticing there seems to be underlying problems, technologically speaking, in the industry. And that's, I guess, when I switched over to the defensive side, the next step of my career at Darktrace.
And it's interesting that you mention penetration testing because even at Wisdom Tree and I'm sure at other regulated companies, you definitely get the sense that regulators in various countries are thinking more and more about cybersecurity. The SolarWinds situation, which affected the U.S. government, is certainly top of mind for the SEC and others, even today, even though that was a few years ago. And so when we're thinking about sort of translating down to people who don't have that background, I mean, some of the words that you hear, and maybe you can sort of give some further perspective on them. You hear about phishing, which seems to be the sending of emails to try to get people to click on certain links, trick them ultimately into maybe revealing personal information, revealing intellectual property, revealing or helping to gain access to something else. You hear about ransomware a lot, which seems basically to be I'm trying to get money, so I'm going to disable an entire network, an entire digital footprint of a company through encryption. You hear not as much at the sort of because there are gangs, possibly individuals that do phishing and do um, the ransomware, but then if you read certain books, as I've had, you hear about something called 0 days, which seems to be you know the ins and outs of a particular system, and you realize, oh wow, the developer on the original code or on a certain update of that system made a mistake, or there's a bug, or there's something that hasn't been patched or fixed, and now you can, if you know what you're doing, take control, root access to the entire system. But what you read is 0 days are kind of harder to find, and maybe state actors are more involved at that end of the spectrum, whereas different types of actors might be more involved and more apt to do things like ransomware or phishing. But as sort of a penetration tester, are you using those kind of things? Are you using something else just to get people out of what they might see in movies? How hackers are portrayed and what they're doing, and get people to thinking, a company like Darktrace, what are the kinds of things in reality that we're ultimately trying to combat against.
Yeah, I love what you touch on there. Just as a side note, if people want to see somewhat realistic hacking, the series Mr. Robot is quite realistic. There's some good consultation in terms of
I love
technical
that
hacking.
series.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good one if you want to see realistic and non-Hollywood hacking, I suppose. But you're right. And you touch on the core of the problem I want to get back to in a second, but it's complexity. Attacks are changing so much. You touched on phishing. You mentioned a supply chain attack where somebody poisons the well of a software company to infect downstream customers. That's what happened at the SolarWinds incident you said earlier. We talked about 0 days, which is like a digital crowbar. I mentioned that earlier, that nobody has a defense against, and they can just basically hack into any system they want. But that is what we're facing as defenders. It's constantly changing different types of attacks. And that makes it so difficult if you think about security. And that was the problem I saw when I came in with my penetration testing team, or red team as you sometimes call it. We didn't get detected because we were the most stealthy ones, but the defenders had such a hard life catching up with the threat landscape, understanding techniques, codifying everything, understanding the latest 0 days or the latest attacker techniques, updating their rules. And they were just always playing catch up. It was way too much work and way too complex. So back in the day, I noticed there needs to be more automation. We need more clever methods to give the defenders an advantage. But Chris, to your point about 0 days, you are spot on. 0 days are normally not used by your or not discovered by your run-of-the-mill cyber criminal. They're more used and discovered by nation-state actors or very sophisticated groups. And then we often have a trickling effect once a 0 day. So an attack that has never been seen before, like a cheat code to get into a system, you could say, is being used and found out by defenders in the wild. We see a quick trickle-down effect where it might be developed and used by a nation-state actor first. Then as defenders, we find it in the wild in an attack, understand it, and all of a sudden this attack, the 0 day, gets picked up by all sorts of run-of-the-mill financial cyber criminals that start using it. And that is the real problem. It's not about defending yourself against this very sophisticated nation-state attacker. Sure, that's also something you want to do, but I would argue 99.9% of organizations out there that are not military, high-end government, or some of the biggest banks in the world, they are not at most risk of 0 days, but this trickle-down effect by the common cyber criminals using tools and techniques that are out there, which they're just not sufficiently defended against. So it's very complex to talk about these things, especially for non-experts, and many hear the term 0 day. It's a bit like the boogeyman in cybersecurity because it's extremely hard to defend against with traditional means. But the boots on the ground reality is there are many other problems, like you say, run-of-the-mill phishing. Somebody is sending your CFO an email asking to transfer some money over the wire, and they are not actually your business partner, but just a criminal trying to extort you for money. So it's not the 0 days that make the big damage impact in most companies. It is the existing vulnerabilities. It is a lack of patching. It's a lack of visibility. It's shadow IT, things that you don't know about that you have. It might be bad acquisitions that are not fully integrated with an attack surface. It might be your employees that get hammered by phishing. It is all of these things. And you just hear me talk through this, Chris, but all of this comes together to complexity. And that is the problem because defenders have so much complexity in front of them. It's really hard to keep up with that without the proper automation and AI in place.
So now I do want to leave some space here and bring Mobeen into the discussion. Mobeen, take it away.
Max, as Chris mentioned in the introduction, that at Wisdom Tree, when we think about AI or cloud computing or cybersecurity, we saw Darktrace emerge as a prominent business in those spaces. We know that as a cybersecurity company, Darktrace has fully embraced AI. I think people in general have an appreciation that there is a natural overlap between AI and cybersecurity. But what would be useful at this stage is if you could give us an overview in the sense that if a customer calls Darktrace to secure their business, for example, what exactly does Darktrace do for them, and what role does AI play in all of it?
Yeah, I want to take your listeners by the hand for a second and give them a bit of broader perspective and then come back to your question, if that's okay. Because I think in order to understand how we deploy AI, it's important to understand the bigger context of how AI is actually used in cybersecurity, what different kinds exist and what benefits they bring. And we can simplify it to just 2 or 3 big buckets. And I'm sure everybody here is aware of the big pre-trained systems in the cloud, a bit like ChatGPT. You feed a supervised machine learning system a lot of data, and it can draw conclusions from that data. The more data it sees, the better it gets. But it's always based on that training data. That's what we normally refer to as supervised machine learning. That's, I would argue, probably over 90% of commercial tech and AI applications, where you give a big machine learning system in the cloud that's running on a lot of GPUs, a lot of data, and it gets better the more data you feed it. We've seen that for some time being used in cybersecurity, that approach, where somebody is looking for examples of attacks, like Chris said, maybe 10,000 phishing emails, and you feed your supervised in the cloud machine learning system these attack examples of phishing. So in the future, your machine learning, your AI can find these 10,000 or similar phishing emails in the future. Now, That is better than hard codifying what you're looking for. It's a bit more fuzzy and you broaden out the net you're throwing there, but it's still always playing catch up. It's always reactive by the very definition. If there's new phishing attacks coming around or new infrastructure exploits or whatever it might be, you always have to refeed and retrain your algorithms and then defend your customers. Let me be super clear. That is not the approach we're taking here at Darktrace. That is the supervised machine learning approach, is broadly speaking what most people do in cybersecurity, and it's better than what we had 10, 15 years ago, but you're still stuck in that arms race. You still need to see examples of attacks, you still need to train your systems, and you always play catch up. When Darktrace came around, it was really the story of two parties coming together, experts, cyber experts from the UK government, that saw that the battle was being lost against criminals because it was always that game of catch up. They had to find an attack first and then hope that they can defend against similar ones in the future. So that was the first group understanding the problem, cybersecurity, UK government experts. And the second group were really the mathematicians from the University of Cambridge, world leading in the second big bucket of machine learning and AI, which is unsupervised machine learning. Those are different classifiers and algorithms that you do not need to pre-train, but you give it a bunch of data and it starts to make sense of that data. It starts to cluster, it starts to determine peer groups, it starts to understand relationships, it starts to understand outliers, and it can make sense of all of that. So the idea was, let's not keep chasing the threat. Let's not keep trying to dissect and understand every attack out there. Let's not learn the breach. Let's learn the business. So the idea was to use a machine learning system to understand every intricate behavioral detail about an organization and a business and create a system that can truly self-learn what the relationships and behaviors, patterns of life for that business are. And that was the nucleus for Darktrace in 2013, where these two groups came together, machine learning experts and experts in cybersecurity, and created this truly self-learning system. And Mobeen, you were asking, so when a customer calls Darktrace, what do we do? What does the AI do? It is not that pre-trained in the cloud, try to look for attack examples race. That is what a lot of companies do very well out there, the Palo Altos, the CrowdStrikes, the Microsofts. And that's a great approach for stopping a lot of attacks. But you always want to have several layers, defense in depth. So what we bring to the table is very complementary. We say, we don't care what's happening out there. We come to Wisdom Tree, making this up as a means of example, and we want to bring our AI to your data. And we want to learn in real time without pre-training it, how Chris communicates with Mobeen, what kind of emails you guys exchange, what kind of data you upload to the internet, what kind of research you do, what kind of files you look at, what kind of protocols you speak, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of data points. And the beautiful thing is, when Darktrace is being deployed, it is not primed for anything. We're not saying this is a financial research company, this is a water treatment company. It is truly self-learning as soon as it comes into your business. So every time Darktrace is deployed in an organization, it doesn't have assumptions about what a financial service company looks like, or a nuclear power plant, or a cruise ship, or whatever we deploy into. It starts to understand the environment and make sense of it without taking all of your data to the cloud. This learning stays in the customer's environment, makes sense there. We do not do cross-training across all our customers. So truly the breakthrough, the thing we bring to the table to your question is to have an AI that doesn't chase the breach, but learns the business, truly self-learns from the ground up, no matter what your business looks like. And then we can do certain things with that understanding of the business. For example, we can tell you when something looks very weird or unusual. So instead of saying, that's a known ransomware attack on Mobeen, we would say, well, Mobeen never scans this network, and he never tries to get to the finance data, and he never tries to encrypt all of the data within Wisdom Tree. And all of these tiny anomalies together create a narrative and a picture that tells us this looks pretty bad, and we probably should do something about it. So it's not just detecting anomalies, what we do for a customer. It is in real time, by what I mean sub-seconds and sub-milliseconds actually, understanding the business behavior and then detecting anomalies, doing behavioral containment, predicting where an attack could happen. We understand your crown jewels because we understand your business, or telling you how you can get back up on your feet if an incident does happen because we know what normal behavior looks like. So I appreciate it's a lot of explanation what I'm doing here, but I think the core that I want to get across is it is a very different approach to most machine learning people hear about these days. It is not the big ChatGPT style pre-trained in the cloud that needs retraining. It's the opposite of that, it's the self-online learning that is truly self-learning in every unique environment.
Max, that's very fascinating in the sense that it's quite a unique approach from our perspective, in the sense that when you typically hear about people building anything in the AI world, you hear about this linear path, or you have an image of a linear path where there's a certain set of data, there's a model that's built on that data, and the more data you feed into that model, the better that model becomes. But what you're saying is that Darktrace has built something that is more bespoke to the business and learns and adapts to what the business is actually doing. I'm curious, have you found that the challenges faced by different industries, and you mentioned a few different industries, financial services, nuclear power, and so forth. Have you found that the challenges faced by different industries when you've applied your framework to those different industries are considerably different, or are the things that make organizations vulnerable to an outside attack fairly common across industries?
There are for sure similarities and common threats and problems across industries, but also some interesting and unique ones you see in different industries. So because Darktrace is not pre-trained, we actually deploy it to any industry and any environment, even if it's offline, because we do not need to update Darktrace constantly to have it run at full functionality. And it's also good to understand that we view ourselves as an AI company first that is applying a lot of machine learning to the field of cybersecurity. And we've done that since day one. We didn't just jump on the bandwagon of ChatGPT 1.5 years ago or something. So when you speak about this and at the different problems and threats facing different industries, that is what's so fascinating, right? Because we do not tell Darktrace what to look for. We literally say, here's the data, start to make sense of it. And after a week or so, we open up the user interface and start to see things. And of course, these things could be indicative of a ransomware attack or data exfiltration or the classic things. But they could also be very weird and wonderful, things that you could never imagine beforehand. And that's what a lot of customers are very interested in. If I can give you an example, I remember a European bank we did run a trial with, which we call a proof of value, years and years ago. And when we deployed Darktrace in their data center, we started to see and understand how everything communicates in their server farm and all of the laptops. And then we started seeing a cryptocurrency mining device, which was very unusual. So there was one server that did Bitcoin mining all the time. And we saw that on the network. Now, the interesting thing is we have other bank customers that do legitimate crypto mining activity because they investigate where crypto is going, they toy around with Bitcoin. So this can be absolutely legitimate activity. Other environments, we wouldn't flag this as it's so normal and part of normal business. But this particular European bank, this crypto mining activity didn't make any sense. So we told this bank, look, guys, we see this one server doing really unusual behavior and you might want to know about it because right now it's just crypto mining, but these things can escalate quickly and have a backdoor installed and could turn to ransomware overnight. And they came back and said, Darktrace, we don't even recognize this server. I don't think it's correct. I don't think it's ours. And we insisted because we had the data, right? So we went into their data center with them and discovered a cable from their core switch, from core network equipment, and traced it because that was where the data was coming from, this crypto activity. And it turned out the cable went under the floorboards in the data center, and a rogue insider, an administrator, had installed a random server there to not pay electricity bills and do the crypto mining for his own profit. And you couldn't bring this up. I mean, now we're talking about a real insider threat case. Somebody might have been not a malicious insider. They just wanted to make a bit more money. They didn't mean to bring the company down, but there was real severe risk for a company in that. And we didn't tell Darktrace, look for an insider doing crypto mining or anything like that. So that's the kind of things you might find. And if I just bring it back to your core question from a few minutes ago, everybody's interested in big ticket items like protect me against ransomware, insider threat, data loss, spam, phishing. But many customers love Darktrace for the ability to look for these subtle anomalies where a business process doesn't make sense, where they move to the cloud and something goes sideways. And you can't find these things with a system that is just looking for threats and is pre-trained on a lot of threats from out there. You can't find these things with the visibility of a system that truly understands your business processes.
So, Max, it's interesting to consider. You look at the general company today, they haven't had the luxury of just basically saying, Darktrace comes to the market and it's my first tool of cybersecurity that I'm ever using. Frequently, you get the impression that companies, they've been around a long time, they've put different cybersecurity solutions in place. Maybe in some cases, they've forgotten about certain ones from a decade or 15 years ago, and they're still paying for it. As we all know, with subscription fatigue, that can affect everyone, businesses and individuals. And so we're in this world where and I again as a non-practitioner, I listen to your description of what Darktrace is doing, and you basically feel as though if you could start your business today and Darktrace is your first cybersecurity provider and the stuff works at least close to how you're describing it, where it's taking in all the business data, understanding deviations from the norm, you would imagine, and I could be wrong on this, but you would imagine that that could be a fairly comprehensive solution. It could pick up because, like you've said, it's not just about emails, it's not just about communications, it's not just about any one thing. It's looking really at everything. But you then step back and say the reality is a typical business today might have 30 or 40 different cybersecurity subscriptions of various types, and you feel like that's not necessarily going away. So how would you sort of square the circle as to where we are today with all these different providers doing all these different things?
I think first you're spot on, Chris, that there are too many point solutions out in the industry, and many people have, like you say, 40, 50, sometimes 100 or more niche point solutions in cybersecurity, which is just complete madness because all of the integration, the data architecture, making this work is on the customer and the organization, plus let alone having the skills to operate all of these solutions. So there's an absolute problem of tool sprawl out there. And I would also strongly agree that we're rapidly innovating cybersecurity. I'd like to think we're one of the front runners of applying AI to cybersecurity, and we absolutely see the benefits that this can bring with consolidation, with efficiencies, with augmenting human teams. There is actually a trend, and I'm speaking to chief information security officers and security teams in big companies almost every single day, where we look at a world of consolidation and platformization. So organizations absolutely want to get away from having too many tools that overlap, subscription fatigue, losing efficiency. And I don't think anybody will ever get down to a single solution, but probably a much smaller percentage of the current tool set is much more healthy and manageable. So we do see a trend of companies like ourselves that offer a broad range of different capabilities from a single AI core, or other companies that approach the platform from very different perspectives. So we think we have quite an interesting, unique capability here of having this self-learning core that delivers various capabilities in our active AI platform. But not everybody can say that from themselves. What we do see emerge as a good trend is having a strong partner that knows that known bad problem very well, that threat landscape, looking at historic attacks, that big data problem I described. And that often is somebody like Microsoft, who's gotten pretty good at security, actually, about all of the standard attacks and all of the default things you might see. But then you have another layer that augments this, that is optimizing it together. And that could be something like Darktrace, bringing that behavioral approach to the table. And then you have best of both worlds. You've got the classic known bad approach, big data, many customers, many attacks seen, staying up with the threat landscape. And you have understanding the business with Darktrace. And we see many customers who say, if I have these two, do I really need yet another email security solution, yet another network security solution, yet another industrial security solution, which they had purchased 5, 10, 15 years ago, and are not really delivering much value anymore. So I think, again, you're spot on there. There's a trend towards consolidation. And as the industry is maturing in technology terms, I think we're going to see absolutely more of that.
Now, we'd be remiss to talk about any sort of thematic today, especially a technology and software oriented thematic as cybersecurity is, and not mention generative AI. The fact of the matter is, November of 2022, ChatGPT comes out, and whatever people think about that one piece of software, which in a way is really just a novelty, look at what it's done in terms of the consciousness and the recognition across basically any public company, when they do their earnings calls now, has to at least nod to the fact that AI might provide valuable tools that the company could and should look into using to better manage and understand data. And Mobeen and I are in a position where when we're trying to translate down to the market and to basically recognize, okay, one of the things that may happen is productivity in an economic sense may go up. You look at certain industries, and cybersecurity is certainly one where you're thinking, you step back and you say, if every company wanted to hire the appropriate amount of cybersecurity professionals, there's not enough cybersecurity professionals in the world today to solve that need. And we've already talked about it in this conversation, the need to use technology and to leverage technology in the best way possible to increase efficiency. So we'd be curious to hear. I mean, obviously, Darktrace was going along. It had come up with its novel approach prior to November of 2022. And then now, okay, generative pre-trained transformers kind of hit the mainstream, and we've seen the video generation, we've seen the text generation, we've seen the image generation. Are there use cases in cybersecurity that you've seen utilizing generative AI specifically beyond just AI more broadly?
Yeah, I would say Gen AI is one of many tools in your AI tool belt. And it's good at certain things and certain problems, but not so good at most other things. We actually see attackers use much more AI since Gen AI became a big thing. And maybe we can talk about that in a minute. I think that's quite interesting to see how attackers are using AI these days. We've been using LLMs for years and years in Darktrace, even before ChatGPT became a thing. Because what is an LLM good at? It's good at summarizing data and understanding context and human language. So we've been using that in parts of our product for a long time, but not in the sense of an AI chatbot. And that's what we see most companies rush to market, right? They have some sort of AI chatbot. So can ChatGPT-like technology, can LLMs, can these big data models help cybersecurity? To a certain extent, yes, for certain problems. I don't think it's going to help with too many detections and sifting through too many alerts. I don't think it's going to solve most problems. It is a human-machine interface in many cases. And what we've seen some solution providers do is rush to market with their own version of an AI cybersecurity chatbot. To be honest, we're a bit skeptically at Darktrace. I think there's a lot of hype and overpromise on generative AI and the chatbots. How it's mostly being promoted in cybersecurity at the moment is that you have an AI assistant that you can interact with to ask questions. And again, ChatGPT and Gen AI, they are good at summarizing data and writing reports. But if you do that, you always insert another human step in the chain. So we're a bit puzzled why so many people chase that approach in the cyber industry if you could aim to automate the whole end-to-end process. We've actually created something called an AI analyst years and years ago that is attempting exactly that. That's a system that we trained on observing for several years actual human cyber analysts. So we collect the data of how human analysts go through incidents. How do they look at data? How do they come to conclusions? What hypotheses do they form? Where do they click at? What data do they evaluate? And we literally evaluated the data to understand how they do these things and put it back into AI to create a cyber AI analyst. So that is doing what a human would do, is automating this full process end to end, the process of investigation analysis. Whereas this current suggestion of the market to use Gen AI is basically saying, here's some data, and now please ask me the right questions, and I'm going to give you some answers. That might help in some cases, but it's still going to involve the human and put more cognitive pressure on humans in many cases.
I love that description of observing the expert analysts. I feel like when you think of, say, self-driving software that Tesla has been developing for numerous years, it's a very tangible AI example, and you get the impression, even though the cars are not necessarily driving themselves without human intervention, at least not yet, you get the impression that the system is utilizing the millions of vehicles on the road to observe human drivers and to ultimately determine and get better and better at predicting what a quote unquote good human driver might do, what a bad human driver might do, how to anticipate, how to be ready, how to get closer and closer to a capability that can truly operate in an automated way with as little as possible human intervention. So I love that story, but I did want to bring Mobeen into the discussion as we go along here.
Max, like we were saying, AI is, of course, a very powerful tool, and it can be employed by the attackers, and of course, it can be employed by the defenders as well. And it was interesting. I recently read a report which surveyed a bunch of executives in the industry, and the result was, when they were asked, is the advantage of tools like AI going towards attackers versus defenders, most people feared or believed that the advantage was going to attackers. And the reason why they were saying this was because they were concerned about the advance of adversarial capabilities in terms of more sophisticated phishing attacks, more convincing deepfakes, and so forth. Now, you might think that if executives are more concerned, they're being more apprehensive, that's a good thing. Maybe they're aware of the risks and they might do something about it. Or maybe they are not aware of how well the defense can actually work and support them in their business as well. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the sorts of ways that the attack is using AI, the sorts of ways the defense is using AI, and how do you see that balance in terms of who is at an advantage in this dynamic?
Yeah, I think I'm actually very positive on this, and it's important to be realistic about the challenge and the problem. So we absolutely see attackers embracing more automation and AI, but we're not at a doomsday scenario where a Terminator is taking over every system in the world and burning everything down. Yet. Who knows what's coming in the future, but at the moment, we're definitely not there. AI on the attacker side at the moment is mainly gaining productivity increases, almost like Gen AI is doing on the defender side. But we've seen that attackers are using Gen AI like smart research assistants to speed up common tasks, like understanding what their victim profiles look like. Instead of spending 2 hours on social media trolling different websites and understanding your victim organization or individuals, you can use Gen AI or other forms to automate that and crunch it down to minutes. And that is maybe the first step to break into a company, but you can imagine there's a life cycle of an attack that goes through many phases, where the first step is getting in, and the last step is accomplishing your mission, destroying data, encrypting data, stealing money, stealing data. And every one of these steps, as of today, can and is being automated by AI or traditional automation. But the result of that is that attackers can do more with less. So at the moment, we don't see more disruption and more headline news because there's not as much attack out there as it could be. There's just not as many attackers as there could be. So it's like shooting fish in a barrel for criminal gangs at the moment. There's so many target-rich environments. If they increase their capacity to attack, they can make more money. That's absolutely what they're doing at the moment. With things like, in particular, spear phishing and phishing. So we've seen very strong correlation between the rise of ChatGPT and similar Gen AI tools and an increase in sophisticated, novel social engineering. So new, bad, very well-written phishing emails, basically. So we absolutely see that attackers make use of these tools and use them to their advantage. The good news is that I think you're right there. Cybersecurity on the defender side is starting to embrace a lot of AI. We've been doing that at Darktrace for a long time now, over 10 years, quite successfully. But now we see the tide rising and many other companies looking at this. I think it's good to have that awareness. I think it's good for executives to understand that cybersecurity is using AI as well. And especially in this day and age, to have some questions ready. If you engage with a solution provider, everybody is going to say they're using AI in this day and age because it's the current hype and you just can't get away without saying it. So luckily for us at Darktrace, we have such a deep bench of knowledge. And as we've seen here, we can talk about this for hours, how exactly we use it, what problems we're addressing, the benefits, the disadvantages, the deployment, all of that. But I think it's good for executives to have some questions ready if they engage with a solution provider of any sort of what AI are you using? Why are you using it? What's the advantage of our traditional automation? What data is it trained on? and what benefits does it bring to our business? Instead of just saying, it's AI, great, let's use it. I'm being overly dramatic here, of course, but I think there is a lot of unclarity in the market. There's a lot of hype in the market, and it's very important to be realistic about this. A, on the side of attackers, what they can do and what they can't do at the moment, and B, on the side of solution providers, what is realistic, what is being achieved. And I guess the last thing I want to mention on this topic of AI being used by attackers is that I think it's very important to anticipate and think about this, especially as many nation states are pouring millions upon millions in the intersection of military research, AI research, and offensive cybersecurity. And who knows what's being cooked up behind closed doors. So this will be a paradigm change if this becomes very big and maybe we see more autonomously spreading AI agents. But until that happens, there's much more mundane problems that the industry is facing, like ransomware gangs, like increasing phishing, like too few defenders, too many things to patch. And we need to work on these basics and use AI to our advantage to get hold of these things and get better, but still keep one eye on the horizon and anticipate that things might change in the future.
Max, going back to something you said earlier when you were an ethical hacker, you said that you always went unnoticed when you did those tests in organizations. I think a few years ago, our own organization at Wisdom Tree, we did an ethical hacking exercise, and later we were shown actual footage of a person having physically entered our office space and loitering around the various meeting rooms, and then I think ultimately leaving without even being challenged. We talk a lot about AI and sophisticated code being used to attack organizations, but in your view, are such so-called social engineering attacks still an important piece of arsenal in an attacker's toolkit here in the 2020s and so forth?
Absolutely. Attackers will always go for the biggest return on invest, or let me say it in another way, a lot of attackers are lazy. They go for the low-hanging fruits. And social engineering, for our listeners, is the art of exploiting the human. It's not about writing very complicated code and being in the basement, breaking into firewalls. It is tricking you as a human to click on something. It's tricking you to give me your details, your password, via con man tricks, more or less. I'm being very simplistic here, but that's what social engineering is about. And you are right. That is a big problem. And still, I would like to bring it back to AI and maybe an example of how we use AI Darktrace to defend against that. We see that phishing in particular is still a massive problem. Why would I, as an attacker, write a sophisticated piece of software like a 0-day to break into a specific company if I could just send 3 emails that are well crafted and achieve the same result, right? It's much easier. And also remember what I said earlier. It's not about having perfect security and being 100% secure. I just need to be more secure than the next company next door, because attackers in most cases are indiscriminate and going for the money. There are, of course, other attackers like nation states that might go after you, but they could come through your supply chain and through your soft spots there. But I think if we think about phishing, you are absolutely correct that social engineering, the human, is still a very weak link. But at some point, when we think about cyber attacks, the attacker is still going to pivot from the human to a system. And I'm sure you folks, Chris and Mobeen, you've gone through security awareness exercises and maybe phishing tests and are told not to click on things. And that's good, but people are still going to click. Maybe not you two, maybe not after the training, but it's almost unfair to put this pressure on the human. That's why we think you could use something that understands your human email behavior. And if you receive an email that is very well crafted, that is trying to entice you to click on something, it is not even reaching your eyeballs because the system detects like this looks very unusual. Mobeen is never receiving this communication with the intention to have him divulge his password credentials. So what I'm trying to say is that approach that we're taking, again, of understanding the business and learning what normal communication patterns mean is helping in the email space significantly. It's one of the fastest growing product areas, actually, because it is such a big threat and we can't put the pressure on the humans. Or to be very pointed about this, I sometimes hear people say, I want to train my kids in kindergarten to be cyber aware and not click on bad links. And I think, no, I want my kids to dream about being nurses and astronauts and podcast recorders and other things. I don't want them to worry about cyber awareness. So back to my earlier point, we need to push the boundaries of technology here in conjunction with people and processes.
No, Max, I first want to thank you in that it's been an incredible discussion. And as we're, winding down and getting to the sort of final moments here, and an interesting thing I notice about the cybersecurity industry in general is that there seems to be this culture of disclosure, meaning that when certain types of attacks are found and certain new developments are made, usually, firms will have some sort of a blog or they'll write some sort of a research paper. Sometimes organizations like NIST and others are, amalgamating and bringing together, aggregating certain types of data that then other systems can ultimately be made aware of. But this sort of culture of awareness and sharing is interesting, and I just wanted to give you a chance to let people know, like, look, if Darktrace has a blog or has things that they put out about what's going on in the world and how their work is touching it, seeing it, protecting against it, are there resources that people can ultimately go to on your website or on other places?
Yeah, thank you for giving me that opportunity, Chris. Three things come to mind depending on our listeners' flavor of the day and their interest, I think. One could be our blog, and I'm sure we can link it in the show notes, or if you just Google Darktrace blog, you will find examples of how our AI actually detects real attackers and finds attacks that have gone missed in real life anonymized environments. So you can really feel and see the cyber aspect and the tangibility of what we do. And I think it's so important to see that we do something different and push the envelope here, right? We're not just jumping on the Gen AI bandwagon, but as I explained our approach earlier, I think it's very differentiated. The second thing, if somebody is less keen on the cyber angle, but more keen on the AI angle, we've got an AI research center. That's our research department in Cambridge and the Netherlands. And part of our website is talking about that, the different patents we have, the different approaches to research, the different research ideas we have. So if somebody is more inclined to look into the AI angle of what we do, look at our website and just look for Darktrace AI Research Center. There's a lot of very interesting things on there, like graph theory and how to predict attacks using different models. And I guess the last thing, if somebody's coming more from the investment community perspective, I would point to our investor relations part of our website, ir.darktrace.com. Under further material, we have various things from our capital markets or technology day from last year, where we go in more detail, all of our management team, through our technology approach, actually in more detail than I've done here today, about our business strategy, about changes we make in the business to go better to market. So I think hopefully there's something in these three things for everybody, on the cyber angle, on the AI angle, and the business side.
Excellent. Thank you very much again. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for taking the time with Mobeen and I. Like we've said, we're trying to put out more episodes and bring interesting guests like Max and to talk about subjects like Darktrace and cybersecurity across the board. So you're going to keep seeing Mobeen and I pop up in your feed. We'd appreciate any feedback that you might have. And again, thank you for listening to The Next Big Thing. Take care.